Thank you, Voice of the Martyrs. When Voice of the Martyrs chose to combine the stories of Richard Wurmbrand and his wife Sabina into one book that is simply called Wurmbrand, they gave the church a gift that is worth its weight in gold. Wurmbrand, produced in 2018, may end up being the most important book of the 21st century, and it's a book that far too many people don't even know exists. And so let's start to change that right here with this review. Wurmbrand tells the story of Pastor Richard Wurmbrand and his wife Sabina as they are radically transformed from Jewish atheists into born-again Christians, only to see their beloved Romania shortly thereafter first become occupied by Nazi fascists during World War II, and then to have Romania liberated by communist Russians at the end of the war. This led to decades of serving and working in the underground church and suffering imprisonments under two different totalitarian governments. I say this book may be the most important book of the 21st century because it shines the brightest light possible on the darkest horrors of totalitarian states, especially those based upon Karl Marx's theories of communism. And currently in America, we are seeing a rise in popularity of the philosophies of Marx. And as they're surging in popularity, we need the story of Wurmbrand to show us where this political philosophy ends. It does not end with utopia, as many people believe, but Marxism ends with the imprisonment, torture, and death of those who simply view the world different from Karl. Richard Wurmbrand recounts how at the beginning of the communist revolution in Romania, pastors and clergy from all religions, they welcomed and supported the communist government. They joined the party. They repeated the communist talking points and expected to find support amongst Marxist proponents. But Richard Wurmbrand had read Karl Marx. He had watched what had just happened in Russia. But the Christian pastors in Romania assumed certainly the same could not happen in our country. Not here in Romania. Their Orthodox and Catholic churches were such a fundamental part of their culture. But then the same thing did happen there. And it could happen here too. It could happen in America if we do not follow Richard's examples to educate ourselves on the goals and the ends of Marxism and then speak out about the times when the roots of Marxism are intertwining with the roots of the church. Because the same pastors who praised communism ended up being tortured by communism. Wurmbrand shows the tactics of the communists, how freedom became not the freedom to direct one's own life or choose one's own faith or path in life, but under communism, the meaning of freedom means you are free to support communism. So on the anniversary of Freedom Day in Romania, they celebrated Freedom Day by rounding up all the subversives who don't support communism in the country and imprisoning hundreds and thousands of men and women. That's how Richard's wife Sabina became imprisoned. It was part of the celebration of Freedom Day. They also had the great works of Greek philosophers, Albert Einstein, Christian authors of any sort. They were all banned. They were seen as dangerous for youth. And right now in America, we have Amazon and more retailers who are banning an increasing number of books from their digital shelves in the names of protecting us from hate speech. But I want to say that this book isn't simply important because it shines a light on the horrors of communism. The word communism should be seen today with the same amount of disgust that we look at the word Nazi. But even more important, Wurmbrand shows us the power, the glory, and the transformation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. There is no power in this world like the power of the gospel to redeem lives, to save souls, and to begin that work of transformation in the lives of those who believe. Through the gospel, Richard was able to bless those who persecuted him and to love those who held him in chains. And I gotta say, this book isn't just important for religious reasons or for political reasons, but this book is also just simply a riveting read. This book, to me, was one of the best of thrillers I have read. This is a moving tale of romance between a husband and a wife in impossible times. And I want you to read this book so much that I decided, instead of just reading a favorite quote from the book, because I have so many, what I want to do is read you almost the entirety of a chapter, because I think it helps illustrate just how good this is. And my hope is that after you hear most of this one chapter, you'll say, I need to read the rest of this book. So bear with me, and I hope that I am all right at narrating books, and maybe I'll get myself an audiobook deal with this. I doubt it, but here is one chapter of Wurmbrand. The war offered ample opportunities to forgive those who harm. When Romania first entered the war, tens of thousands of Jews had been killed or deported. In the city of Yassa alone, 11,000 people were slaughtered in a single day. Because Richard and Sabina lived in Bucharest in 1939, their lives were spared. But Sabina's Jewish parents, 3 sisters, young brother, and other relatives who lived in Bukovina were rounded up and sent to Transnistria, a desolate border province annexed from Russia. The journey to Transnistria was treacherous and claimed the lives of many. Starvation, humiliation, and brutal execution awaited those who arrived. In sweeping genocide, every member of Sabina's family was murdered in Transnistria. When Richard broke the news to his wife, Sabina crumbled. Memories of her childhood rushed back into view. She would never see her mother or father again. She would never again embrace her sister or her younger brother. How did they die? Who took their lives? She clutched her chest as guttural sobs flowed out. If Sabina ever wept for her family again, Richard never saw it. I'm not going to cry, she said, straightening her shoulders and slowing her breath. You should have a happy wife. Mihai should have a happy mother. Our church deserves a servant with courage. Not long after, the Wurmbrand's landlord, a devout Christian, told Richard there was a soldier staying at his house. I knew him before the war, he said, wringing his hands, but he's changed completely. He's become an absolute brute who boasts about how he volunteered to exterminate Jews in Transnistria. He brags about killing hundreds with his own hands. Transnistria. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Can it be? During dinner with Sabina and Mihai, Richard kept the news of the soldier to himself, running it over in his mind and contemplating what he should do. After Sabina tucked her son into bed, she drifted to sleep. But Richard remained awake, his thoughts racing. God would not let him sleep. He crawled out of bed and went upstairs to the landlord's apartment for an all-night prayer vigil. Richard knocked on his landlord's door. As it opened, he saw the silhouette of a soldier lounging in the living room. As the landlord made introductions, the soldier stood to his feet, towering over Richard. His name was Borilla, a battle-seasoned veteran who filled the room with an intimidating aura. Richard could almost smell the metallic waft of blood still lingering on his clothes. He joined the 2 men, and Borilla began to recount his wartime experiences, bragging about slaughtering countless Jews. He even boasted of killing infants still in their parents' arms. Richard listened to his stories, wavering between feelings of rage and sorrow. Borilla stopped to sip from his glass. It's a frightening story, Richard interjected, but I'm not scared for the Jews. God will compensate them for what they suffered. He looked squarely at the soldier. I'm anxious thinking about what will happen to their murderers when they stand before God's judgment. Borilla leapt from his chair, a large vein pulsing in his thick neck. The landlord leapt up as well, fearing what he might do. Richard and Borilla were both guests in his house, and he wouldn't allow a brawl. Borilla eyed Richard suspiciously as he regained composure and then returned to his lounge chair. Over the course of the evening, the conversation drifted to more neutral topics. Richard noticed that Borilla became a pleasant conversationalist. He loved music and described how, while stationed in Ukraine, he'd fallen in love with the local songs. "I wish I could hear them again," Borilla mused nostalgically. Richard knew some of those old songs as well and saw an opportunity. "The fish has entered my net," he thought. "If you'd like to hear some of them," he told Borilla, "come down to my flat. I'm definitely no pianist, but I can play a few Ukrainian melodies." Though his family was asleep, Richard welcomed the two men into his home and softly played the songs Borilla loved. The soldier's eyes welled up and his face turned red. Like David, the Jewish shepherd boy who played the harp before King Saul. Richard knew the music was having a profound effect. It didn't take long for Richard to exhaust his repertoire. He slid his hands from the piano keys and faced the murderer. "I have something very important to tell you." Borilla wiped his eyes. "Go on." "If you were to look through that curtain," Richard said, gesturing toward the wall, "you'd see that someone's asleep in the next room. It's my wife, Sabina. Her parents, her sisters, and her 12-year-old brother were killed with the rest of her family." The soldier glanced at the curtained room. "You told me that you killed hundreds of Jews near Golta." Borilla nodded. "That's where they were taken. You don't know who you've shot, so we can assume you're the man who murdered her family." Borilla jumped from his chair. Richard held up his hand. "Wait! I want to try something. Let's do an experiment. I'm going to wake up my wife and tell her who you are and what you've done. And I can tell you exactly what will happen." Borilla looked at the pastor in bewilderment. "My wife won't speak one word of reproach to you," Richard assured him. "In fact, she'll hug you like you are her brother, and she'll bring you the best supper she can find in the house." Borilla clearly didn't believe him. If he had murdered her family, she would most certainly demand his blood. Richard continued, "So if Sabina, who's a sinner like all of us, can forgive and love like this, imagine how Jesus, who is perfect love, can forgive and love you. If you turn to him, everything you've done will be forgiven." Borilla's hardened exterior crumbled. Confronted with guilt and forgiveness, the killer clutched his shirt with both hands and ripped it apart. "Oh, God! What do I do? What do I do?" Borilla cradled his head in his hands and sobbed. I'm a murderer. I'm soaked in blood. What do I do?" Richard declared, "In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I command the devil of hatred to leave your soul." Borilla began to tremble as the two men prayed aloud together. Over and over, Borilla asked God to forgive him, to relieve his conscience of his crimes. When Borilla had exhausted himself in prayer, Richard said to him, "I promised you an experiment, and I'm going to keep my word." He drew back the doorway curtain and slipped into Sabina's room. "There's a man here you have to meet," he whispered, patting Sabina's shoulders. She rubbed her eyes and sat up. "I believe he's the man who murdered your family," he added. "But he's repented, and now he's our brother." Sabina wrapped herself in a robe, sat in silence for a few minutes, and then went to greet her family's murderer. Borilla was surprised when Sabina embraced him. The two held each other and wept together, kissing each other's cheeks again and again. Richard knew his wife's heart. If God could forgive her for the crimes in her own past, she could forgive Borilla. If God could cleanse her conscience of all the people she hurt, all the strangers she cheated, all the damage she inflicted, then God could surely do the same for Barilla. Then, just as Richard predicted, Sabina went into the kitchen to prepare the soldier a meal. This book is the best book I have read in years. And I have read a lot of good books over the last several years, but this is the best. Even if you've read Tortured for Christ, read Wurmbrand because it adds more to it with Sabina's journey. Put this on the number one place on your reading list. Read it this year. This is such a good book. Get it, pass it on, share it with others, and you won't be disappointed. It is that moving, that powerful, showcasing the glory of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I highly recommend Wurmbrand, thankfully put out to us by the Voice of the Martyrs. If you enjoyed this review, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the Rev Reads YouTube channel in order to stay engaged in the delightful world of Christian literature.